Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Fake Accents Unite. It's a pleasure to be bringing you the show this evening. I'm joined, of course, by my effervescent co-host, the Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Effervescent.
Yes,
Oh dear God.
sort of fizzing,
There you go up building expectations again.
kind
Good
of,
evening, everybody.
kind of fizzing, bubbling personality of just positivity and all that good stuff that you are, right? That seems accurate, does it not?
Oh, well, of course, if you say so. Moving on.
We're also joined this evening by a one-time stream guest, although not on this show, on the channel, but Aydin Paladin has joined us this evening. Good evening.
Hello, good evening.
Absolute pleasure to have you with us. For
Thanks for having me.
people who don't know, Aydin has her own YouTube channel. She can shamelessly shill throughout the show, covering a whole range of topics, sort of in psychological phenomena and I think coming out of cultural critique.
Yeah, I would say that the theme of my channel, the way when people ask me, like people on like regular real world people ask me what you do, is I say I make videos about the intersection of psychology and current events and politics. So that's, if you're not familiar with my channel, that's basically what it is.
There we go.
How do we apply science to the crap we see in the world?
A much more professional description than what I gave right there. So thank you for that, Aydin.
No.
And yeah, it's been a bit of a strange week. I like lots of little news stories, a few conceptual discussions going on around sort of the general media landscape of Britain, but nothing has really jumped at me as like the big story of the week. You know, like the enormous thing. But I'm sure we have plenty to talk about with regards to these little stories. But in the meantime, I would like to ask both or either of you whether or not anything has jumped out at you over the past week, or have you been enjoying something particularly in private life which has been engaging you. This is a show which is not just about current events after all, but it is also about the personal interest and that sort of thing.
Well, I couldn't possibly do that to your netball teams. When it comes to news stories that jumped out, the one thing that seemed to grab me was the whole Diana interview thing with the BBC, which interested me much more from the BBC side than it did from the Diana side, because I'm not much of a royal watcher, but the fact that the BBC was found out to have been, well, lying and faking documents and then clearing itself in an investigation, and and then the person who conducts the inquiry then eventually gets to be the head of the BBC. It all looked about as bent as one can possibly be.
I'm sorry. I also don't pay attention to like anything royal related. Could you? I didn't even hear about this. What was the gist of it? That they?
Well, in about 25 years ago, there was this famous interview where Martin Bashir, on behalf of the BBC, interviewed Lady Diana, or Princess Diana, as she then was. She was separated from Charles, but she wasn't divorced yet. So
Okay.
that was the famous interview in which she said, there were three of us in this marriage, referring to Camilla Parker Bowles and whatever. So she really kind of sort of dished the dirt. But when it came to the build-up towards this interview, what one needs to remember is Martin Bashir had absolutely no royal connections whatsoever. So he seemed to pull this interview out of a hat, which, of course, in the BBC was kind of looked at as, oh, he must be a great journalist. Well, it turns out that he approached Lady Diana's brother and suggested to him that that he had inside information that the palace was out to get her, and that he in fact had proof of this. And he made up this story that both the private secretary of Prince Charles and Diana's private secretary were receiving payments from a company that was actually a front for the British Secret Service. And he showed he had obtained these statements, bank statements, to prove that these payments had occurred. All this was complete nonsense. The bank statements were faked. he had in fact got in touch with a graphic designer he knew to fake the bank statements for him. The problem with that was that, of course, this fed into the idea that Diana had that the pals were out to get her. So it was almost as if he was confirming her paranoia. So when it then came to this, well, if it's war you want, it's war you can have interview, how much of this was that would actually ever have happened had it not been that he had provided all this false information?
Right.
The BBC then later looked into this, having realised that there was something going on, and absolved everybody completely. And the person who did the sort of internal inquiry later, strangely enough, was the person who then became the head of the BBC.
That's just a little bit suspicious.
No corruption going on there.
You look at this and you really think, wow. And Martin Bashir, so even when all this whitewash had happened and whatever, I think at some point he left. But he was then, as late as 2016, he was rehired. And I think even a year later or whatever, he was then promoted to editor. So, it almost seems as if one completely just wiped the slate clean and just went on regardless. And this was still a world-class journalist or whatever, even though in reality they must have known, because even if they didn't officially admit it with their sham inquiry, they must have realised, oh, good God, what was he doing here? I mean, it's now gone so far that, even Prince William, who isn't, how shall we say, he isn't the one who wears his, his feelings on his sleeve like his brother. Even he came out and made a statement saying this was a bloody disgrace, and the BBC might in fact be responsible for some of the things that later happened. So you kind of look at this and you're wondering, how much damage has the BBC taken over this? Because, frankly, the news is just about all they've still got left.
I mean,
so that entertainment section has long since gone.
They keep taking hits to the BBC, deservedly so, I would say. Wasn't there that story last week where a young, one of their reporters got done for some aged tweet where they were saying something like Hitler was right. Yeah, let me.
I saw it pop up somewhere. I knew that they were recently.
I've not heard that. No, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh, here we are. Yes. Here we are. So excuse the flipping siren, which is apparently going on past my desk. It has not been.
They're coming to get you before they're coming to get you before you publish this tweet.
So, BBC journalist put on Twitter, Hitler was right, back in 2014, it seems.
Spicy.
Very, very edgy take. This is Tala Halawa, who said, hashtag Israel is more Nazi than Hitler. Hitler was right. IDF go to hell. Pray for Gaza.
I see. I
figured that's what it was
today. I caught this earlier today, but I was kind of wondering, who is this woman? I wasn't aware why this was, bouncing about Twitter, because I had no idea who this was. So this is a BBC reporter. Yeah,
so at the time, she was a staffer, and then she said, I'll read the article. It's from The Spectator. It says, it's not been a happy week for the BBC. The corporation has spent the last 4 days grappling with the fallout from Lord Dyson's damning report into the Martin Bashir affair and Prince William's angry response. Now a fresh controversy has blown up in the BBC monitoring unit. Digital journalist, that's her title officially, Tala Halawa, has been closely involved in the Beeb's recent coverage of the Israel-Palestine conflict, providing additional reporting in a piece on children who have died and fronting a video about the model Bella Hadid's views on the issue. Halawa is the so-called Palestine specialist in BBC monitoring, specialising in...
Yeah, one can see how that might cause just a little bit of a conflict.
Yeah, so she works for both their Arabic site, the BBC World Service, and the BBC in general. So there's that.
So how old is this tweet?
5 years? It's, yeah. Sorry.
Years.
No.
Okay.
It's 2014. Sorry. So it's 7 years old.
Okay.
I don't know what was kind of flaring up in 2014 with regards to this thing, but then the two nations are never really out of conflict, are they?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not going to weigh in on the whole like Israel-Palestine thing, like where I stand on it or anything like that, because to be perfectly honest,
probably not the best for YouTube. I'm pretty sure.
I think when it comes to this, you know how one sort of says sometimes, people sort of get waylaid with old tweets of their own. And often I have a great deal of sympathy or whatever, but I think once your statement is Hitler is right, it doesn't really matter how long ago it was you said that.
I don't even know, unless it's an obvious joke. Unless you're clearly making fun of people who think that kind of thing, then I don't think that it really matters that it's an older tweet.
I mean, knowing
you just ask yourself, how would you develop out of that position? Do you understand what I mean?
It's such a substantive statement, and in the context of that tweet, for instance, which doesn't appear to be, just trolling or having a joke or anything like that, right? Like it's going to be very, very hard to contextualize that in a way which is there.
It's not a statement you can say, well, it was youthful exuberance and I've matured a lot since then. Do you understand what I mean? It's very difficult to kind of...
If you're also already an adult, I think that it could be said that I don't really buy into the stories that we've seen in the media a whole lot that say that there's this alt-right rabbit hole that if you go use 4chan for a day, you suddenly start zcaling. But I could say if you're 14 and you say something like that, yes, your political ideology could grow a lot, and it is possible for people to become de-radicalized. I mean, Daryl Davis, of course, that's what he was all about, but and is all about. I'm going to talk about him in the past tense, but at the same time, if you're an adult working for the BBC, I'm going to imagine you already have some pretty solidified political beliefs. You I'm guessing have a degree, so you're fairly older and not a teenager who's either going through a weird phase or just being edgy for edginess' sake. That being said, people can still change in their adulthood. Absolutely, I have. Most people have, but that's a hard one to come back from. That is a hard one to come back from.
It's that word you just used there, de-radicalized. That you would effectively have to be talking in those terms. That would basically mean that she would first have to concede, which I doubt she would, that that's a radical position to start with, and that you'd have to be de-radicalized.
I don't know if it is on Twitter currently with the Palestine-Israel conflict going on. I've seen some stuff on Twitter over the last 2 weeks that was absolutely appalling, and coming from predominantly the left about Jewish people, and I couldn't say that. First of all, I wouldn't say that. But even if I wanted to, I absolutely could not say those kinds of things. But if you have a rose emoji and a hammer and sickle in your profile, then absolutely you can say those kinds of things.
Well, that's the new verification badge, isn't it?
Yeah, clearly.
You also need one of those little miniature Palestine flags.
Yes, obviously you need the Palestine flag. That's the prerequisite.
The new, and people will have that next to their rainbow LGBT alliance flag.
It's sort of it's
so bizarre.
It's the 21st century equivalent of sort of the 1980s, where you would have been wearing one of those Arafat scarves.
Oh yeah.
Oh god, the
what are those called?
Online political uniforms of the day.
Well, it's all just a method of sharing social identity. The irony is not lost on me that were you to wave your little rainbow flag in Palestine, they'd probably throw you off a roof. But I mean, it's all part of social identity signaling, or not just signaling it.
There was that wonderful picture I saw on Twitter. Some kind of demonstration in which there was some people with, as you can imagine, various coloured hairstyles, holding a poster, and they're all sort of cheesily smiling for the camera, and the poster reads "Queers for Palestine."
Yeah,
I remember someone posted it up saying, "Who wants to tell them?"
Yeah.
Well, I think where that comes from too. Sorry.
No, I mean, as I was going to say, you know where it comes from. It comes from, like, first off, a complete misunderstanding of the kind of people that they're supporting, but also a kind of blind adherence to this idea that because Israel as a state has only existed for less than 100 years, that it is a new extension of settler colonialism, in particular the arm of the USA, right? So they're like, oh, you know,
Well, I kind of agree with that, actually. By the way,
it probably, but like, it depends what you there's so much tumultuous history in that area. We don't even want, like, we don't really want to get into it now either. And I say that not to kind of cuck the chat, but also like, and not just to appease the YouTube gods, but also because I am not knowledgeable enough about the history of the area, especially in recent years, or the formation of the thing, to even come anywhere close to an informed opinion, and so I don't want to touch it. I don't want to touch it with that. But going back to,
I feel the same way, by the way. I don't know how much I can say on it. I'm not that informed either.
But going back to this this young lady who made this Hitler was right comment. She made the comment before she was hired by the BBC. That's one of the first things. But you would think, given that, you know, I mean, I appreciate that I had a job in the military, which is somewhat requiring a bit more. But I can't imagine the BBC doesn't do background checks. And 2014 is not that long ago. They were doing like checks of tweet histories and stuff like that, right? So
yeah, my first chapter published, I think, was on exactly this topic. First book chapter I ever published, and that was on how companies use background checks based on Twitter and Facebook, and that was published in 2012. So it's we're studying it then. It's a bit past you knowing about it.
I wonder what your chances would be today of getting a job at the BBC if you applied and in your Twitter feed there was still an old tweet saying Alex Jones was right.
I mean, I guess it depends on how much of a background check they really do. Like, they must do keyword searches, obviously, but that's what we found back then.
Well, I'm curious as well, because take my, I mean, her account, they're looking at her account now, right? So they're looking at an old tweet that wasn't deleted through her account now. So it's got her real name on it, it's got her real photo on it. I wonder whether or not this was the case back then either, and whether or not they knew she had a Twitter account, right? So, like, I mean,
okay, good point.
I am not going to give my Twitter handle, as it were, as not so obvious to a company as like my personal Twitter account. That just seems silly to me. Like,
that might be it too, because back then a lot of people, and I mean, I did too, had a personal Facebook, personal Twitter, and then a professional Twitter, professional Facebook. So that might have been the case, that it was her personal one and people weren't aware of it.
Right? And I just... but, I mean, just such an edgy... I can't imagine... If they somehow managed to pull a way out of their ass to give her her job, let her keep her job, I don't know how the BBC is going to survive... I mean, the BBC has survived a lot of things, but...
I mean... I mean, a lot of people on the left love Jeremy Corbyn, so I think they'll probably be okay having someone work for the BBC who says Hitler did nothing wrong or whatever.
When it comes to the BBC's survival, I believe the sort of their charter renewal negotiations are coming up, because I think every 10 years or so they need to have their charter renewed, given that they have such a special status in Britain, that they can sort of demand a license fee and things like that. So Parliament needs to grant them a charter, and therefore every few years they kind of have charter negotiations between the government, Parliament, and the BBC. And I believe this is about to start again, or something like that. And, you know, there are already questions being asked about the license fee. But now...
Well, it's ridiculous, first of all.
Now various Tory ministers seem to have basically questioned the independence of the BBC, because the BBC, given that it's such a large institution and that it has such standing both nationally and internationally, has always regulated itself. So it hasn't fallen under sort of media regulators like other newspapers or broadcasters or things like that. But now, of course, given that they whitewashed what was such an outrage, now the question of self-regulation is, of course, up there. So once the BBC would be regulated by someone else, things would be completely different. I mean, the BBC as an entity would, it would no longer reflect what it is now. So now it looks as if Tory ministers in particular, Priti Patel, I think, came out quite strongly in this regard. They're kind of saying, look, we need to look into the regulation of the BBC. So maybe there needs to be some other body that looks at them. But that means they lose this entire independence, if you know what I mean. Because, yes, once they cheat like that, literally fake documents and whatever, to the point where they're clearly interfering into the result of an interview they make. Because, had it not been for that interview, completely different things might have been said.
Yeah.
And then
really
they
different
look
things
into
might have happened.
Yes, and then they look into it themselves and give themselves a clean bill of health. That's when you sort of think, well, no, self-regulation doesn't really seem to be working, and the only reason they're arguing for self-regulation is because, like that, the cover-ups are easier.
Yeah. Well, it's like the CIA earlier this week.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Yeah,
the
CIA.
Self-investigation, we're fine.
They did a self-investigation, and they were like, we have determined that we had no links to the rise of the crack cocaine trade in America. It's just...
it's hard to do internal audits in general are difficult to do in any kind of organization. In a regular, normal business, it's difficult to do an internal audit because people know each other. There's a social connection there. It's even more difficult to do.
There is also the institutional desire to protect the institution.
Exactly. That's the other big issue, is that if you work for the BBC or you work for the CIA, you have a social identity that's tied to your work there, presumably. So if you don't bring out in an external auditor, it's always going to be favorable towards the in-group.
The example I would use there would be, in recent years, the Catholic Church, where clearly there was even those who knew what was happening was still that interested in protecting the institution of the Catholic Church, so they still wouldn't go to the police or other authorities.
It's happened all over the world involving the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
What's the name of it? There's a great documentary. It's about a cover-up that happened in Baltimore, which is, where I grew up as a young teen, and I think it's called The Keepers or The Watchers or something like that. It's a really good, it's on Netflix. It's a good documentary about how the Archdiocese just covered this stuff all up. And many people were complicit in it because it's part of your identity.
The complicity is just staggering. But in the end, when you go all the way up the hierarchy, you get to the point where John Paul II was, to all in fact, as much as he was a person of great standing and he had great historical impact, I think most people would agree by the end of his reign, he was senile. So he wasn't really in charge of things anymore. He was of that ill health. And you then had various cardinals and whatever who were involved in protecting these various rings because they themselves were involved in it. And that was when Ratzinger, who then, didn't he become Pope Benedict? I'm never really sure what their papal names were, but Cardinal Ratzinger, he basically famously tried to do something about it and try to warn the Pope as best as possible, or various other people in the hierarchy, but didn't get anywhere. And you feel, well, okay, so now you've tried it internally and you failed. Now surely you go externally. But then the attitude set in, no, we must protect the institution. We can't do this because otherwise it will bring us into disrepute. And that was what so tarnished his papacy, that once he then eventually became Pope, everybody sort of started wondering, well, yes, you get the credit for being one of the few people trying to stop this, but at the same time, you never went beyond internal.
Right.
And yeah, so, we've seen various institutions. There was also, this was a long time ago, but there was the famous Dreyfus affair in France, where the French army would rather see somebody completely destroyed rather than admit that things were going wrong internally, because, oh, well, we need to protect the honour of the French army, and this is the famous Dreyfus affair.
I mean,
so you get these situations where the institution suddenly becomes some sort of, golden calf.
I mean, a bit closer to home. I mean, we had it's amazing from my personal subjective experience of military bases how insular they become, and then it becomes about protecting the reputation of the base as well. And they know this is an issue. It's one of the reasons why soldiers and officers and other NCOs move around. But it's the reason Deep Cut happened, right? So. You know about Deep Cut Barracks, Britisher?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that whole issue.
I don't know at all.
There was an issue with a huge suicide rate amongst recruits at Deep Cut, and it turned out, of course, that there was this hideous culture of both bullying and hazing and emasculation and some really nasty, almost torture in some cases, and people would just...
Well, I think there was also some questions regarding whether some of those suicides were suicides.
Yeah, that too, right? So
people who managed to shoot themselves several times with their own rifle.
In the back of the head. Yeah, it's always...
in the head. No, in the front of the head, but nonetheless you would sort of think, hang on, how exactly do you do that? It's once you've got the first shot in, it might be difficult to repeat it.
But in a sense of... But Deep Cut, I think it's been sold now. Not entirely sure. But it's just been... stricken. It's like a limb which has been severed, right? So I wonder, when it comes to institutions like the BBC with these sorts of things, they'll cut her loose, assuming their investigation doesn't reveal that they decided they want to go full transparency and be like, actually, we do support this particular point of view. I don't think they will do that, but I think they will cut her.
I don't think they'll get to. I think if they do that, they won't get too many interviews with Prime Minister Netanyahu anytime soon.
But I think they'll cut her loose and they'll say, we've done an internal investigation. We've cut the dead wood. We pride ourselves in doing this. Occasionally, one slips the net. It's a shame. Like, obviously,
the sole rogue reporter.
Last time it was Savile, but now it's just this. Talawa, whatever, Malawi, whatever her name was, Tala Halawa. There you go. What a weird, just what a strange name. Anyway, Tala Halawa. Just say that 5 times fast.
No thanks.
No. So that was. Man, we've got onto some dark topics at the beginning. I was like, what are people's, what have you enjoyed from the last week?
To cheer things up, I must say that photo you found a photograph, but you found one juxtaposed with chickens for KFC. I quite like that.
I can't take credit for this one. Queers for Palestine being equivocated with chickens for KFC. It was a Richard Orrett. He submitted that one, although I think I've seen it somewhere else. So I don't know if he'd made that one or not. So there we are. In kind of other more general news, Tony Blair is back. He seems to be everywhere all of a sudden. Have you noticed this, Britisher?
I wouldn't say he's back, but he's making more appearances. Definitely, yes.
I've certainly seen him be mentioned a lot all of a sudden by a lot of people. Also, like a weird deference to his opinion from people I wouldn't expect to be deferential to the opinion of Tony Blair. Of we should listen to what he has to say. And I don't know why that's the case.
Well, former Prime Minister, hallowed be his name. Yeah, but it's that sort of, yeah.
I guess so, but I also watched, people on the left did that to George W. Bush in the last couple of years. And I of course, grew up, everyone hated Bush, everyone on vaguely the left. And, Bush was a bit of a joke in many ways, but there was the same type of people who hated Tony Blair and now are singing his praises, and I just find that personally a little interesting.
Well, I don't know if it's the people who are singing his praises are the people who hate him. I think it's more that the Blairites who used to be part of the Blair establishment have now moved on from the Labour Party especially after the whole Corbyn thing, and now occupy a huge number of sort of general media and commentary positions that then they can exert a kind of influence through. But it's also the case that you have to look at what came after Blair. So there was Brown, who was not popular at all. I remember there was that scandal with the letter with Brown, wasn't there? Aside from like all of the economic policy, right? Where they had to blame it on his dodgy eye, the fact that he had like misnamed someone or written something wrong as a letter to the mother of a dead soldier or something like that. So he wasn't very popular. Nobody wanted Brown back. And then there was Jeremy Corbyn, of course, who was massively divisive in the party. Well, I mean, Ed Miliband in between, but he was just a wet cushion who decided to create the Labour manifesto on a stone as a marker for all time.
I don't know what you mean. I think Ed Miliband was tremendously popular. I remember all those young women, screaming as though the Beatles had arrived when he arrived with his bus.
Oh,
you won't be familiar with this, Aydin. They came up with this trope whereby, Ed Miliband. Clearly, this was some kind of PR exercise where they decided we need to make it look more exciting.
I think this was a meme.
No. So
no.
You've got this time and time on the news being mentioned, and how this, the campaign bus would arrive, and Ed Miliband would step out of the door, and there would be, I don't know, a dozen young women all terribly excited to get their selfie with him, and you just thought, are we really supposed to believe this? It really was one of those moments where you just think, how dumb do they really think we are?
Ed Miliband and the Millibabes. That was the general gist.
Oh my god, really?
Right. But so he was as memorable and delectable as a soggy piece of wet tissue paper. And I distinctly remember from the election around that time that he basically had never spoken up in a debate until the last week, and people were like, "Oh God!" Like he's acting a bit like a leader, and of course it was far too late. Then there was then there was Corbyn. Then there was now we have Keir Starmer, right? So it's interesting to see Keir being like, he played the quiet game because Jeremy Corbyn was very vocal, and so he basically was talking in the sense of, I'm going to fix Labour, I'm going to change the divisions and that sort of thing, and it's all very much internal work, it's all very in-house, and he didn't make, and hasn't made, to be honest, that many public appearances and that many public statements, but he has the charisma of a damp rag, so he's just an incredible.
Yes, but politically, he's more than likely more in the Blairite mould.
No. That was
the emergence of Blair.
Well, that was Keir was kind of selling himself as like a return to Blair, right? So that was, but that basically alienated a lot of the existing party, even though they are deeply divided anyway. The remaining Blairites are like fine, but of course Keir is no Blair. And it just doesn't have the charisma. His background, he has a lot of skeletons in his cupboard that just won't.
Don't start me!
Yeah.
No, when it comes to the Labour leadership, what they need now is not a Blair. They need a Neil Kinnock. Kinnock was really the one who laid all the groundwork in reforming the Labour Party. After him, briefly came John Smith, who died, and then Blair inherited it. But Kinnock was able to appeal to certain parts of the left of Labour, but he was determined to reform them. Kinnock had the gift of the gab. He was very good rhetorically, which is, of course, why Joe Biden plagiarized him famously.
Oh, right.
There was, I think, was it in the 1980s Joe Biden stood for president for the first time? I'm not sure. And he pulled out after it became clear that he had ripped off a Kinnock party conference speech.
Amazing.
Yes, I don't remember when that was that he did that, but yes, that is
and he
absolutely
dropped
true.
out. So yes.
Yeah, and then he dropped out.
So there is a connection between the present president of the United States and Neil Kinnock. But yes, in Britain, he's more famous for being the man who pulled Labour back from the abyss. And there is a famous speech in which he was kind of berating them at the Labour Party conference, in which there is this line: "A Labour Council is doing all this nonsense," and he is now, he was later credited very much with the one who kind of brought them back from being completely insane. And in a way, if you've had several years of Jeremy Corbyn, and you've got the likes of, the sort of race baiters like Diane Abbott and David Lammy and whatever,
we'll come on to her
is
later.
Actually a Kinnock. You need someone who can talk to a fairly leftist base, but somehow talk some sense into them and bring them back. He may not necessarily be the person to win an election,
right.
but it's someone like that you need.
Right. So Keir Starmer is someone completely and utterly lacking in vision. And what what you're describing, like Blair had his vision, Kinnock clearly had his vision, and Keir is just a nothing. He's a stayover. It's like a wait until someone else comes. Not to mention that he's just utterly capitulated. He has no clear definition for the way he's led by his subordinates, which is mainly why they are doing exactly the same thing that they did under Corbyn, and infighting a lot, and also making these weird sort of statements that really don't resonate with the public. One of the things which Blair has noted in his critique of Labour, and I think this is the reason Blair has come back, talked about this a little bit on Unpopular Opinions last week, is because he is basically sending truth bombs, as it were, to the Labour Party in terms of strategy rather than necessarily vision, which is things like take the whole trans rights thing, which is big for Labour at the moment. That's one of the big things that they're pushing, is like Labour is trans rights are human rights in Labour and that sort of thing, and then a load of reforms and potential policy options surrounding that. And Tony Blair's just like, the vast majority of the population could not care less about this issue if they're not actively opposed to it. It's like there's a small sliver who are completely actively opposed, a huge number of people who know nothing, and then a group of people at the other end who are strongly in support. Who are you appealing to? Not the masses, right? So it's like, you can still hold this position, just do it when you get into power, but you need to appeal to the masses to get into power first. And that's the kind of the slimy Blair position, I suppose.
Right, which is repugnant too of make more generally acceptable statements. It's social judgment theory, which is just make a statement everyone agrees with and then reveal your true positions once you get into power. And that has been the case with so many politicians. Something I just absolutely despise.
It's the famous line: while you're campaigning for power, say, "I agree with free speech," and then finish the sentence later once you're in power with comma, "but."
Yes, but, right, yeah. Well, I mean, social judgment theory, the theory I mentioned there, is what it is. It's a persuasion theory, and it says that if you want to get people on your side, you start by making statements that everyone agrees with. And then once people have agreed with the first couple things that you've said, they have become psychologically invested in your subsequent statements, and therefore, to avoid cognitive dissonance, they will be unlikely to disagree with you in the future. Unless you go too far, but it makes people, because they've agreed at step one, to not want to disagree later because it's psychologically uncomfortable. And it's a horrifyingly effective tactic that you'll find pretty much all politicians use of, I love puppies, and then, everyone likes puppies, and then they go and do something awful because once you've agreed with them once, it's more difficult to dissent afterwards.
I guess it's why dictators like kissing babies.
Oh, absolutely. It's absolutely the kissing baby phenomenon, but it has to do with, and once you are aware of like some of these basic psychological principles and communication theories, it's so weird to watch political debates because you can watch them being used by. I mean, Trump absolutely used them. Trump knew exactly what his side wanted to hear, and didn't do much of it, obviously. And Biden knew exactly what his side wanted to hear and managed to mumble some of it. So I guess it works.
One of the curious things I'm interested in is, like, as Chat has mentioned briefly here, I think it's, where is it? Fury Kitten has made a good point. Is the methods which people are using to measure this. So we know that social media companies can have a huge impact on the outcome of, say, an election. And we know that the Labour in the last election, in the kind of Corbyn election, I don't think it's as high as Kitten is saying here, it being 90% support. But there was a huge, like this huge feeling, especially on Twitter, that, you know, the race was a lot closer than it was with regards to Labour and the Tories. And then they went and suffered the worst defeat since 1935. So it's curious to me how social media ends up impacting not just the people who use it, but the people who interpret the data within it as well. And also the tendency of people to be expressive on social media, because there's clearly a large contingent. Some will argue that it's an age thing. I think it's possible that there's an age component in there, as in, like, just people not being that tech literate as they are older, and students and the like also being much more willing to engage in these kind of polls and surveys and whatnot. But I don't think that I think, first off, that gap is shrinking quite rapidly, but also that it's a question of expression. I'm quite worried that they'll learn from this and basically adjust the percentage weighting, as it were. But again, just curious that we see this huge disparity between real life and online, and it's important to kind of keep in context that, you know, our finger on the pulse may be a finger on the machine that's reading the pulse, and the machine may be faulty.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the first thing that, not to go on a huge tangent, but this is my primary area of research interest and always has been, is internet communication. And the first thing to be aware of is that internet communication is not the same thing as real world communication. I think most people know that, but it's important to reiterate in that there's a couple of anonymity effects that go on, even if you have your real name in your Twitter bio, even if everyone can link up everything that you say with your real life. All online communication is inherently low in media richness. Even video conferencing is lower in media richness than face-to-face communication. That is, media richness moves from maximal richness, which is face-to-face. Video conferencing removes some of that richness. It removes, like, say, a smell. You can't tell if someone stinks, you know? And then as you move further and further down into pure text, more context and nuance is removed from what someone is saying. In addition to that, what the big effect, the reason I brought this up, is de-individuation, which is the anonymity effect. And this involves I can never say this word, pseudo-anonymous or pseudonymity. So what that means is that people are disinhibited towards actions and things that they say online comparatively to real life. It doesn't matter if they're identified or not. They're always comparatively pseudonymous. This manifests in two ways: toxic disinhibition and benign disinhibition. Toxic disinhibition is, as it says, nasty stuff. People will say things that thinking they can get away with them. And benign disinhibition is being more willing to share your true feelings. And either way that it manifests, the reality is that the way people act on the internet is not the way that they act in real life.
I'm curious, to me, it seems to me that, yeah. First off, yes. Secondly, I'm wondering that to what extent this has just replaced the diary paradigm. Like, people used to write down all their, you know, their real thoughts and what they actually thought of the person down the street in the diary, and now it's broadcast for all the world to see on a thread about BBC. Yeah,
but now you get a dopamine hit when someone responds to it and they like your tweet.
Yes.
It is increasingly pleasurable for the person to diary, essentially, but now you get social confirmation for it. And that's a very powerful thing.
So what you're saying, not so obvious, is that Twitter is effectively millions of people's inner dialogue.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
100%. As disjointed and ridiculous as that might be, as filled with fiction as much as it is with fact. And
I think
our job is to trawl the depths, I suppose.
I think to one extent, when it comes to what you said about the election result, that, you look online and everything seems much closer and much more closely fought than when you then actually get a real vote. I think it depends on what sort of populations one thinks are actually the people who are swinging it. So
Yeah.
here in Britain, we had that famous, the sort of pollsters had all pointed out Workington Man. And Workington Man is kind of a working class guy who perhaps drives a van, in a very working class job. In Workington is sort of the typical constituency for that, but also all the others in the sort of the red wall that then eventually began to fall. And I'm not really sure whether those people, sort of working class plumbers, I'm not sure they're necessarily the people who do a lot of fighting on Twitter. The same thing, I think, with a lot of sort of Trump support. I don't think sort of, unemployed steel workers and whatever are necessarily the people who are out there giving it hell on Twitter.
No, it tends to be... I mean, there's definitely a bias on Twitter towards both people who are...
I mean, you were talking... You said there might be sort of a bias. Perhaps there are too many students in that mix, and I think that's more the way to look at it. And that's why you get these kind of, false impressions at times.
Yes, I think it's... real quick, I think it's freedom of time. The steel worker, be he retired or whatever, is probably investing himself in some other kind of activity. The worker is working or dealing with their family, dealing with their personal hobbies, and is not overwhelmingly involved in these political discourses, and really only thinks about it when it comes time to vote. It's cognitive miserliness, in that we only have so much energy, literal energy, that exists to power our brains that we can allocate to different kinds of concerns. And allocating our brain energy to thinking about politics, which is exhausting, I think even those of us who like it a lot would have to admit, is just not something most people want to do. So most people don't think about it.
It's like the problem I face when trying to get Not So Obvious to watch the film Ben-Hur. It's impossible.
I love Ben-Hur.
He just won't move. He just won't watch it. Yeah.
I watched 1 Hour Photo last week, but it's not Ben-Hur. Do you know 1 Hour Photo?
I don't know 1 Hour Photo. No.
A long time ago. That's with Robin Williams, isn't it?
Yeah, in a serious role.
Oh, is that where he's the creepy photo developer type? Yeah. Okay.
He's a very sympathetic character in that film.
Yes.
Which I don't know. It was a good film. It was a good film. I was going to watch Citizen Kane, but I couldn't get it to work due to issues surrounding.
You see what I have to put up with here, Aiden. Any excuse.
Any excuse, indeed. Speaking of the Labour Party, Diane Abbott has protected her account. So she has made it so that you cannot respond to certain tweets of hers. I would be curious which way round that this will fall. 1 second, I'm just going to see. Oh, you can respond to some. She's protected a particular tweet, which we'll get on to in a second. But again, given that old Donald Trump wasn't allowed to block people and that sort of thing.
Anyone.
And that but Twitter did the opposite thing with him and didn't let people comment on his stuff directly. But whether or not Diane Abbott is allowed to.
I had a similar thought with the mayor of Chicago. Because
I know nothing of this.
When Trump was basically told that he couldn't block people from Twitter or whatever because people needed it for their professional, for professional reasons to be able to access it.
It was a First Amendment right. It was the right of the people to contact the president in the public square.
Then you hear that Lori Lightfoot has said that she will only hold face-to-face interviews with journalists of colour for her second anniversary in office.
I heard about this.
Yeah.
And you just go, how is that legal if the other isn't?
None of this should be legal. The fact that they banned Trump before he was technically out of office it should be a violation of the very court ruling that said that Trump couldn't ban or couldn't block other people. That, I mean, I don't know why that hasn't gone further into court, just that aspect of it, because that was the whole thing. It was determined in a court of law that Trump could not block people because he was the president of the United States. However, then, and it was a key way through which the American people communicated with the president. So when you then ban the president from your platform, how is that not a violation of the exact same ruling? That one really has always gotten me a little bit twisted. I don't understand how that's supposed to work. But as far as I know, that hasn't gone to court. So, alrighty, explain it to me, please.
Yeah, very strange. Anyway, like that's a complete tangent.
Sorry.
We've all ended up. This is the tweet in question.
Not that we ever do tangents on here, not so obvious.
No.
We always stick totally to the subject and are completely focused all the time.
I always have like a script for you to read and that sort of thing. All our interactions are planned in advance. There are no mistakes on fake accents. In fact, I even plan all my ums, in the stream.
In that regard, I have only one thing to say. Watch Ben-Hur.
And every week I write the same joke as a reminder in my diary to see whether or not I'll do it, but I just don't.
I think it is worth watching Ben-Hur. I didn't know this was an ongoing thing, but I do think it's worth watching. It's a great film.
I have no doubt that it is.
Everybody agrees with me.
Okay. So this is the tweet that Diane Abbott put up, and for the sake of things, this is about Sasha Johnson. Okay. Black activist Sasha Johnson in hospital in critical condition after sustaining a gunshot wound to the head. She was shot in the head. It was either this morning or last night or something. Nobody should have to potentially pay with their life just because they stood up for racial justice. Black Lives Matter. Okay, couple of problems with this. It's coming to light, and it came to light sort of fairly rapidly through friends of her, that she was accidentally shot, first. And secondly, she was accidentally shot in a gang shooting in a fight between two rival gangs in London. So that's just... This seems completely disconnected, shall we say, from the racial justice angle. And she's been completely ratioed on this, of course. But the whole... I bring this up anyway, not just as a snipe at Diane Abbott and her own incompetence and idiocy, which is apparent, but also because the actual story itself is quite interesting. And I think they're trying to spin this as like there are people on Twitter who hate this person and like are reveling at the idea that she might die, and it's like they put up some tweets with maybe maximum 40 likes, which is
well, that's always the way that the cherry picking goes.
Which is always one of the ways of the cherry picking. The vast majority of the coverage I've seen, people have responded with, I may not agree with her, but nobody deserves to be shot in the head.
Absolutely.
And then of course,
that's kind of the sane response, right?
Right, that's the sane response. Then you have other people who are going mental and saying, that she, this is clearly related to BLM, and it was probably a white supremacist. People who haven't read anything at all. And there's the worst contingent of all, which is how would I describe them? Like right wingers who, presumably, what the left would call flag shaggers. All these people with like St. George's flag in the bio and whatnot, who were just spamming a fake tweet that she supposedly made, saying that we should enslave white people. And
I saw this. That's the part of this that I saw on... I don't use Twitter that often. All I've been doing it recently for is updating stuff on my channel or posting food pictures. So I just see little bits of this. Now, that's what I saw of it.
I appreciate that it won't have the same effect, but I am quite concerned that she'll get turned into like a British George Floyd figure if she dies and they suppress the story enough. But also... the whole thing around it is, it's like it gets me frustrated about the kind of inability to critique without misinformation. It's one thing I notice, like the left that I know that I observe typically runs with misinformation kind of universally. The right has the same problem in that it will pick up a piece of misinformation, run with it, get called out by the left wing and the right wing, because the right wing is kind of a bit more
out their own, which
it's a bit more self-policing, and we won't get into the idea of that some people have, like whether or not the right really exists. But the
sorry. But continue.
What did you say, Aydin, there?
I didn't know that was an idea that people thought there.
Well, there's the idea that the left is defined by its collectivism, and therefore it can be collectivized, whereas the right is only defined by its opposition to the left, right? So there's, as in it's more diverse. But the
fundamentally incorrect, but okay.
More neurodiverse, apparently. But I say that's a whole nother issue. But you look at this and you just go, oh my goodness, like why are there so many stupid people, or people who are just willing to take things, like I see a tweet which is that inflammatory and I go, it could be true, but I'm gonna make damn sure that I work out whether or not it really is true before I go spouting off about it. Like, I've been caught out too many times, I mean not frequently, but especially when I was first getting into politics and you kind of accepting almost everything at face value, you're
you anticipate good faith from other people, only to realize that is not the case whatsoever.
In any way, shape, or form, and even the best people with the best of intentions can be mistaken. So there's that. I mean, there are plenty.
I've retweeted fake stuff. On accident. I always apologize for it and make it very clear. I don't delete the tweets usually. By the way, when it has happened, it's happened a few times. I leave it up there and put a big disclaimer underneath of it and go, "Hey, this is fake," because otherwise people will then be like, "Oh, you tried to hide it." It's like, no. I make mistakes. People make mistakes. Everybody does. But that's the problem with a bunch of this fake news stuff on both sides, I would say. Sorry. Side.
People... Oh, sorry. I just need to address something in the chat. Mark is kissing AA's arse a lot tonight. Perhaps he's on UO again tomorrow. Firstly, no. I'm currently serving a 3-stream ban from Unpopular Opinions. And secondly, no, just no, and it would be a disservice to AA to suck up to him, as it were. That man needs critique. That's all I'll say on that. Yeah, so when it comes to the kind of fake news thing, it's hard to understand what we do about like the whole misinformation thing because it's so rife. Whereas if the same thing had come out of say the left, they would have run with it absolutely until it was proven effectively in a court of law.
No, it wouldn't matter. I have actually research on this. It'd take me a minute to pull it up, but there was a study that was done a couple years ago, fairly recently, that involved the fake news scandals in the U.S. and about that. And it turned out that people believe whatever they read first. It's called the primacy effect. And generally speaking, if you believe whatever you read first, particularly if it aligns with your political beliefs, it doesn't matter if you're actually shown contradictory information after the fact. That first belief... So, like, in this study in particular, they were shown a fake news article. They were then shown a direct refutation saying that the article was wrong. And about 40% of people still believed the fake news. They recalled it more easily. That's how this stuff works, and it's the real danger of actual fake news. So, sorry.
Well, no. Well, again, speaking from the research point of view, if you take a framing effects research, once a moral frame has been encoded, which is a fancy way of saying if somebody makes a moral statement to you, you have formed an opinion as to whether or not that statement is moral or immoral. It's very, very hard to influence that. It's basically whoever beats you to the punch in getting that moral statement across typically wins, because if you can if you can do it, then oh god, sorry, I've just seen we need a people's vaccine for Labour.
Well, it's funny, that's sometimes, not that directly, but something related to it is called inoculation theory. And that's the idea that you give a small injection of the opposition's opinion so that then when they inherently make it, it sounds stupid and you can knock it down. So but it's whoever gets to the punch first, particularly with a moral argument, and then if you provide a weakened form of the opposite moral argument, like mock it, they stand no chance for people who saw that your argument first.
Yeah.
That's how all this works.
Britisher, how melted is your brain right now?
Sorry.
Very.
Very. I think we'll leave the technical discussion there a little bit then.
Sorry for all the social science.
It's fine. It's fine. It's enjoyable. I think people will enjoy it. But I'll try and keep Britisher on side. Bless him. Otherwise, he gets very angry at me.
Oh yes, I'm famous for my rants at you. Am I not?
Yes. The screaming, the response videos. Is it just all of it really? I had something else. Right, okay. Let's move on to everybody's favourite topic, COVID.
Oh boy.
Everybody loves COVID, right? So there's this whole thing around the Fauci has basically said he's not sure whether or not actually his previous statements about it definitely not coming out of a Wuhan lab were accurate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and this has led several media companies to erase their, shall we say, rather stringent stance on this thing. So Vox, for instance, is one of them. Vox is editing its articles that were like fact checks of this whole post hoc stuff. So, for instance, they had a statement saying, the Wuhan Institute of Virology is a real place and the exact origin is still a mystery, blah, 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 blah. And so they would say, virologists who've passed the genome and infectious disease experts who study coronaviruses have more than enough evidence to show that the virus is brand new and came from nature, not the Wuhan lab. And they've edited this. They've changed that to say that the experts now say they have enough evidence rather than have more than enough evidence, and they've just removed the Wuhan lab reference completely and all that sort of thing. One of the things that interests me about this is just the ability to rewrite history without having to without being legally required to state that you are, for instance, right? You can, as a media corporation, you can fight for all the clicks you want, and put out that misinformation, and then later on you can just go back and correct it, and you're not legally obliged to put a disclaimer, as far as I'm aware, that you edited that article.
You are ethically supposed to do that, but that has not held back. So, generally speaking, what you will find is there will be a tiny sentence, usually in smaller font, either at the beginning or at the end of the article. It depends on how much temerity the particular journalistic organization has, whether or not they're willing to put it at the top or the bottom. That'll say this edit, and it usually, even on the better outlets, it'll just say this article was edited on blank, originally published on blank, and it won't necessarily say what was edited, and that's been real fascinating here.
And it's really sort of pernicious as well, because in the cases where they get away with it, where people are not using archive or Wayback Machine and that sort of thing, and the kind of people who are autistic enough to, I suppose, go back and do all of that.
They're not going to reread it anyway. They're only forced to do it. They're fearing lawsuits and things like that. And I will say, the weird thing about this is that I remember the timeline of how the COOF has evolved. We were saying this stuff, or at least I was seeing people say this stuff about the Wuhan lab leak or Wuhan connection, in terms of this not being a natural virus, right before it actually blew up, right before the actual pandemic started.
Yeah, when it was constrained to the region, pretty much.
Right. And I saw it then, and then it became a global pandemic, and suddenly you could not say that. Suddenly this was all just a completely normal thing that happened, and now here we are a year and a half later, and we're coming back to the things that were said in the beginning, and it's absolutely absurd. I really dislike and am disgusted by the lying to the people in general by news outlets. I don't know why it makes a difference to say that this was made in a lab, if it was, or that there was some laboratory involvement. and that this was not a completely naturalistic virus versus it being a naturalistic virus. Unless, of course, you have something to gain by working with China.
Well, so. for me, the issue is to do with the substantive statements. This is always my issue with the media. So I don't care that they've gone back and changed it all to, they say this and they say that and it might be this and it might be that, right? They've changed all of their substantive statements into queries, effectively. But it should always have been that. It should always have been like a contentious. It should always have been an opportunity and an opening and a doorway into dialogue. It should never have been let's dunk on these idiots who think that. Like, I believe that even about like complete bunkum stuff like flat Earth, right? Because I don't think that flat Earth is that interesting, right? So I don't think that much stuff will be written on it, but I think that the stuff which will be written on it will be like, oh, this, that, and the other. And if somebody is like on the cusp of being convinced by flat Earthers that for some bizarre reason we live on a disc with a dome, then at least there will be people who there will literally be articles out there which are like debunking flat Earth theorists and that sort of thing. I mean, that's one of the great strengths and one of the reasons why people have meteoric rises on YouTube is they find a particular niche or a particular topic that they happen to resonate with, and they absolutely tear the shit out of it. But the people who really do well are the people who are open to everything, and they're like, but why are these people so closed? Like, why are these people so closed is kind of the I suppose the raison d'etre of the YouTube critic, right? It's one of the reasons for the success of, and it doesn't matter whether or not it's news or media or whatever. I mean, take Mauler, for instance. I mean, his whole thing is all about bringing film critic back into film criticism, right? As well as anything else.
That's why his channel's blown up, and with extremely good reason, is because so many film critics were just kind of being like, I don't really want to critique the film because that might make someone's feelings upset. And Mueller just comes in and says, what he observes and provides evidence for what he observes and therefore why he has the opinions that he does. It is empiricism in its own way, and so much of empiricism has just been destroyed. It's all feelings. It's all emotions. And it's hard to say facts when it comes to film criticism, but there are things you can definitely point to there. There's things with journalism you can absolutely point to. And I think now they might say, like, oh, well, we made a little temporary mistake, but then we corrected it. You should face some more consequences other than whoopsie when you make a giant mistake like that, and then replace it with nothing more than sort of hand waves that maybe this was wrong. We won't be more clear about it.
To put it in sciencey language, they've taken inferential information and turned it into descriptive when it should never have been. Can you tell that I've been writing my statistics course recently, and I'm talking a lot about inferential statistics versus descriptive, but it doesn't matter.
But yeah, that is exactly it. It's inferential into descriptive, which is, you can't make that translation that easily.
No, I mean, like, there's a whole process. There's a reason for there was supposed to be a reason for peer review. I mean, we've talked at length on another stream about the issues with peer review, but it's for goodness sake, it gets very frustrating when, like, this is the most basic level. If there was a journalism Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this would be the bottom level, on the level of like food and shelter, right? Like,
they don't even have basic peer review. And I'm not saying that my prescription wouldn't be like, before you publish an article, it has to go through the same process as publishing a article in a scientific journal, where you have to have a panel of anonymous people to review it. Although maybe that is a good prescriptive. It would be time consuming is the biggest problem, and a primary function of news is to be timely. That would inherently remove the timeliness aspect of it if you had to get a bunch of people to review it. But the way that it works right now, and technically there's supposed to be an editor that reviews this stuff, but the editor, I don't think they really do, particularly in some of these more raggish journalistic outlets. They just say, okay, well, if it's wrong, we'll just update it. And then no one will read the update. No one will know about the update, at least none of the normies. Weirdo, obsessive people who read news voraciously, like I guess most of us do, probably in the chat and elsewhere, we notice that happened, but normies do not. And then again, they believe the first thing that they read. And that is pervasive, and it is extremely deleterious, I believe.
How on earth have we we were talking about the coronavirus leak, and we ended up on a critique of peer review. There we are. And bless him, poor Britishers just sitting there going,
"No, that's okay.
Why?"
I use the restroom real quick. So
okay.
So I'll shut up for a few minutes.
Chat, say whatever you want to say now about Aydin in the chat, so that she knows when she comes back what you really think of her. Britisher, any kind of?
I'm still here. I'm still breathing oxygen. Yes.
Any kind of commentary, I suppose, on the broader topic there, which is that, now it's kind of in question, was COVID real or invented or whatnot? What do we see as the consequences of if it does come out to have been, manufactured by a foreign power?
I mean, if it was manufactured by a foreign power that would have been in charge of a development lab in Wuhan, I mean, it could be myriad different powers, couldn't it? Yes. I'm still not sure whether the West would have the gumption to finally say, okay, look, we need to do something about China. I think
we're all too dependent.
Whether they have, I mean, at the moment, they have got the feeling it came about naturally, but then any information about it was suppressed. Instead of that, one would say, oh, it slipped out of a lab of ours, and then any information was suppressed. I still don't know whether the Western world would kind of say, okay, look, we need to do something. I mean, my opinion. My opinion is Cold War with China. It's been my opinion for a long time. Yes, I mean, I would love to see there to be that moment that kind of galvanizes the West, says to it, look, we need to do something about this. We are building up our own, global rival that basically seeks to destroy us, seeks to dominate us. Why are we doing this? And when you then have people sort of say, oh, well, yes, but, our economies are so interwoven and whatever, well, then unweave them. I mean, seriously, it would be difficult, yes, but it's not impossible. And when it comes to post-Second World War era, I'm sorry, but our forefathers managed to, do a Cold War. Why shouldn't we? I mean, I lived through the end of the Cold War. Life was possible.
I thought you were going to be like, I lived through a Cold War. It was fun. I enjoyed it. If we'd just kept things going, we could have kept the war going for another 5-10 years.
Yes, of course.
That's Mad Jack Churchill quote there. Anyway,
of course it is. It's just it's perfectly possible to live in a Cold War, and it would just as well be possible for present generations to do so. And if you look at the alternatives, I'm not sure that would be preferable.
There's an episode of South Park called Pinewood Derby, where aliens come to visit Earth, and Earth gets hold of a load of space cash, and it gets split up amongst all the nations of the Earth, and the space cops come by because the Earth stole the space cash from a deceased alien, and say, we all need to hold on to the space cash. None of us can spend it yet. Right, and is it Finland? I think Finland starts spending the cash, and all the other countries are on the phone at that time, and they nuke Finland because Finland wants to rat on them to the space cops. And
is this how the Greek-Korean hyperwar began? Are you aware of that meme? It's fantastic. Look it up. The Finno-Korean hyper war.
Finno-Korean hyperwar. You heard it here first, chaps. But
not for me first. I'm not that creative. It's really fantastic though. If you want a nice meme.
And but the point with the episode is that it's just like all the nations of the world just decide to nuke one country to avoid catastrophic issues. Like every nuclear power suddenly decides to press the button and nuke China because there's nothing else that makes sense. Like, and then when questioned about it, they'd be like, "Oh no, not China! Oh, we really love China. They must have nuked themselves."
Well, of course, I guess if there's no one left to say anything about it, you can redefine history as you like.
Oh, God.
This is just it. You know, what I'm talking about wouldn't even require nuking China. It would just mean we would get our iPhones from sweatshops in Vietnam or Indonesia and not China.
Yeah, just some other Asian country, as long as it wasn't China.
If there was more protectionism, and as a libertarian, this is always a difficult position for me to talk about, but if there was more protectionism, we could make these kinds of products at home. They would cost more money, but they would cost just as much to import from places like China. It's because we don't engage in trade protectionism, really at any degree with China, that they've been able to dominate while essentially using slave labor, not just essentially, literally having internment camps for people right now. So,
well, yes, it's also that their entire supply chain is completely crooked. So, you know, their steel is heavily subsidized. So if you
oh, right.
subsidize the coal and the steel, then those general, you know, commodities will obviously enable them to make the products that are made with steel much more cheaply.
Meanwhile, we don't do that in much of the West, and in
Yes,
fact, because
precisely.
of environmental protectionism, we basically destroyed those industries.
The West has gone out of its way to basically stop the various Western competitors from subsidizing. But China does so merrily and no one bothers.
And China has no environmental protectionism.
Yeah,
really.
I mean, you're assuming that we'd have to build a steel industry, right?
No, there's dozens, probably far more than that, of steel mills that have been shut down over the last 20 years, 30 years in the United States. That were, you know, there's the Rust Belt in the U.S., which is mostly Appalachia, Pennsylvania area, where, you know, just 30 years ago they were producing all American-made steel, and they're all shut down. The one that I know particularly a lot about is because my family, my dad's family, came from a small town in West Virginia where there was a huge steel mill. It was bought by the Japanese, and now it's completely shut down. And it's so interesting to look at if you, I guess, are into like urban exploration or what you would call it, to go look at these massive buildings that consume these little tiny towns of 30,000, 20,000 people, and half the town is a steel mill, and now it's all just rubble, essentially.
Yeah, in some cases they didn't just close down the steel mills. In some cases they took, whether it's steel mills and other factories, they took them apart and shipped them to China and put them back together again there.
Right, exactly. And again, if we had some level of protectionism where we'd be willing to pay a little bit more for American products, not only would we have, or British products or whatever have you, at the expense of not giving away that industry to China, you really wouldn't be paying that much more in the long run. You are paying more, obviously. But you are also giving people jobs. For example, since I'm talking about my family's background in the steel industry, when my dad was 18 years old, originally he was not going to go to college because he had a job working in the steel mill, making more than he made coming out of college comparatively, considerably more. A lot of money for a young person without a college level education who was making what today would be $15, $20 an hour or something like that. And because we've shut down these industries, those don't really exist anymore because we've outsourced them to China. And as a result, yeah, what is a young person's options when if they don't have a college degree? And if they do, by the way, it's not a particularly useful one. You go work in fast food. You go work in a Denny's.
Let's be real here, though. Like the when you say paying a little bit more for steel, this is the issue. It's the same reason why people mass use Amazon as opposed to ordering from their local shop. The convenience is key. You would have to have a national level commitment, which would have to be supported. So it would have to be like all British government contracts are only going to use British steel or British companies and that sort of thing. And that kind of isolationist approach is also not going to fly. Just because, like, aside from the fact that there is no establishmentarian who thinks like that anymore, and certainly are not in any great numbers. But they don't see it as a vote winner, and so it's not a vote winner. It's for the same reason.
Yeah, but I still don't think that the choice is entirely between we either make everything in China or we make everything at home.
Yes,
you can still simply sideline. You can still effectively do what you're doing now, and have everything done abroad in as cheaper countries as possible. Just not China. You know, there are the Philippines, there is Indonesia, there is Malaysia, there is Vietnam, there is Thailand. There are plenty of places where we can run sweatshops and have these things put together. There is no need to build the components to your iPhone in China. You can do so elsewhere.
Yeah, I suppose so. And I would agree that we don't need to be completely dependent on China alone, and that is an issue. However, I don't know if these other countries have the infrastructure to produce at the same level that China currently does, and that will be a barrier in the way to doing that. China does now have all big industrial facilities that, Vietnam probably does to a degree, but not to the same degree that China does. And that, now, if we trade with all of them and import from all of them rather than China, it will probably end up being more expensive, so you end up with sort of the net sum being the same. I don't think you do have to produce everything internally. It's not feasible for a lot of stuff at this point. People won't take those jobs, I think. Actually, that's not true. I think they will. I think people would probably rather make more working at a steel mill than make less, even though that's more demanding work. It's more dangerous work, technically, although things are so heavily regulated now. That's the other issue, right? Sorry, off on an aside. The other issue with importing all these goods is that in the West, we put regulations, not just environmental, but safety regulations. And that's why Chinese steel and steel from, I would imagine, Thailand or Vietnam or wherever is going to be so cheap. It's not just because they don't have environmental regulations, but they don't have safety regulations for people. You know, if someone gets seriously injured working on a crane at a steel mill in the US, then the steel company has to pay for that person probably for the rest of their lives. And that's not the way it works in countries like China, where they don't have those kinds of systems.
I don't disagree. Yeah, no,
this is why it's so much cheaper. And again, is it good for us economically to import some? Absolutely. However, morally, I can't abide by it. Morals and economics don't mix well. But
I think you can even just ignore the morals, and you can just look at it and just go, for the long-term health of the West, is this a good idea? I mean, just compare the situation with the Soviet Union. I mean, remember, we were against the Soviets because the Soviets were communists, right? Now, I know the Chinese have kind of become quasi-capitalist, but I say quasi for a reason. They're still run by the Communist Party.
Well, the capitalism occurs in isolated areas. It doesn't affect the people, generally speaking, who are working in rural areas who don't have access to.
I mean, it's this is an absolutely horrid nation that is a serious threat to the rest of the world. I mean,
absolutely.
Just given the fact that they are about a fifth of the world population, should tell us something. And if you now compare that to the Soviet Union, look what we did with the Soviets. We would not sell the Soviets a single computer. Nothing. They got nothing. And now with China, we've integrated them into the entire global economy. And you're looking at this going, why? What? I mean, there seems to have been this doctrine that seems to have come about somewhere around the Nixon era, in which one thought, if we integrate China, if we allow sort of capitalism to take hold, then invariably, with greater sort of liberties to the individual and whatever, will come democratic reform. This has been categorically disproven by now.
Well, much like the trials where we said let's get psychopaths together for group therapy and try and integrate them back into society, and all that happened is they learned to mimic.
Well, yes, but I'm not joking.
I'm not joking
either.
Seriously,
the doctrine. This has been happening for years. We've heard this time and again under various presidents. When it came to Hong Kong, again, it was kind of seen as Hong Kong will be the cuckoo in the nest. It will be what will break China. Because it will introduce an element of a developed democracy into China. And we've seen what that's led to. So the entire doctrine is crock. But it's as if one just doesn't want to let go of it. And one just, look, first thing you have to admit is it's not working. It's not working because it's simply not right. The theory doesn't hold. And therefore you need to distance yourself from this whole thing. And the first thing you need to do is distance yourself from this monster. Because when it came to the Soviet Union, we did the right thing. And they eventually went broke. And they had to effectively... I know now Russia is building itself up as another rival, but let's be honest, it's nothing like the threat that once came from the Soviets.
No, it's nothing like the threat that's currently.
But
the biggest
getting it from China.
Well, the biggest thing with like the Russian threat and all global threats is it's contingent on the ability to project military power. And whilst Russia was able to maintain its military reserves, it could never update them. So the Russians are working off of, at this point, 70 or 80-year-old equipment, which is all falling apart, by the way, because nobody makes the parts anymore except them, and they don't know what to do with them. So they have this enormous number of aircraft, for instance, but I would be surprised if half of it is working, right? So, and they're all slow, and none of them have modern firearms and that sort of thing on them. So even the tanks they rolled into Crimea, were relics of the war, right? So
ancient,
really ancient technology, and that's the thing which crippled them, was the fact that they were left behind in so many ways. Like, they still have the capability to defend themselves and that sort of thing, and we were never going to aggress them in the way in which they would aggress certain other places, but that's the way you do it, because that ability to project force is that kind of primary authority from which all other authorities derived, right? So with China, it's curious because, of course, the big thing, and I've mentioned this before, that they're trying to learn at the moment, and the reason why there has been, aside from the fact that they're getting rich off us and draining our resources, and buying up our land. That's definitely happening, especially in the north of the UK, for instance. They're just buying up massive amounts of land and houses and whatnot. The reason that they are so pally with us is because they want to learn the ins and outs of both naval and air warfare without investing the resources themselves and into development, because they're not great at innovation, and they've always been a land army based nation, and they had a very sharp shock observing the events of the Second World War, and when they realised that basically the reason that Britain, for instance, was able to project the British Empire so far was because of its naval strength primarily. So they're learning, and they're open. They're completely open about the fact that that's all they're doing. That they're learning about that, and as soon as their government decides inside itself that it's learned enough, we're in trouble. So
I think we're in deep trouble right now, and it is a good thing to bring up, considering how we dealt as the West with the Soviet Union, is how we should be dealing with China. And ultimately, in terms of like the paying more things for locally made products, when you don't have to deal with import fees and all kinds of other stuff, and the fact that it increases the labor force and injects money back into its own system, I don't think you ultimately would have to pay more money for an iPhone that was produced in the United States. I don't think you would. A couple cents more, but probably not more in the big scheme of things. If it was produced all in the US or in the UK or wherever, in the West outside of China, obviously you don't have the slave labor, though, involved in it. And the fact that essentially what we are doing right now is, as you said, we are funding the Chinese to, in every possible way, to figure out how to come after us. Militarily, socially, economically. We are funding our own destruction.
And that is very surreal. Sorry, we're all agreed then. Cold War with China seems to be the right thing to do.
On a lighter note, I did put it in the stream chat thing, a link.
Okay.
This was from, I think, a few weeks ago. It says 10th of May. And there's just a wonderful parallel to a certain virus that, of course, never escaped. Because, yes, they were missing 3 leopards from a zoo and never told anybody about it. 2 of them they managed to catch, but I think the third one, I don't know whether they've caught it by now, but at the time of reporting, it was still out there.
Let's have a look. In a second. I'm just gonna make it.
Oh, what is this?
Make it so people can see the old screen here. China search for leopard missing more than a week. 3 leopards escaped from a park. 2 has since been recaptured, but there's 1 around apparently. Authorities in China are searching for a leopard that escaped from a wildlife park near the eastern city of Hangzhou more than a week ago. As early as the 1st of May they escaped, but they were only confirmed missing on Saturday.
Well, hang on. This was published, May 10th. So
So these were these are the same people who failed to get across to the rest of the world that there was a virus loose. Maybe you can see a parallel.
Well, they're unscrupulous, I suppose. But
they're not very good at reporting things, are they?
Well, they're not.
Of course they're not.
Of course they're not. They don't want to be. It's everything must be assessed in terms of its potential damage to the party first, right? So
yes.
Well, I would say it's more the damage to the functionaries. Everybody, you have to understand that in the hierarchy of the sort of Chinese Communist Party, everybody is busy climbing the greasy pole. And any bad news from their region is 1 up for their competitors climbing and 1 down for them.
Lethal.
How interesting is it that this is essentially what the communists complain that capitalism is like?
Yeah, but it basically disincentivizes anybody from putting out bad news. Because that, of course, immediately means that they and perhaps their leading functionary takes a hit. Of course, once the leopards start, discovering the local kindergarten or whatever, the hit could be considerably worse, but it's a risk these people are willing to take.
Grief.
Well, I see this whole idea also being adopted very quickly in the West of let's just not release any kind of negative news about our party. We have to cover it up. And this is particularly the case with the Democrat Party in the United States of just don't tell the truth or just don't report on it because it will demoralize people. And this is
God, and it's infected the sciences as well.
Well,
absolutely.
I mean,
it reminds me.
Sorry. I just want to. I remember distinctly having a very sour taste in my mouth after a particular lecture where we had been sat down and it was like, when you do your research and you're doing your ethics proposal, every piece of research has to pass an ethics board. And
the
they
IRB
said
in the United States. I don't know what it is in the UK, but we're the Institutional Review Board in the US.
Okay, so we just have ethics review board, right? ERBs. And they said, usually internally run by universities, but there's other ones for private corporations and that sort of thing. But they basically said, so when you're doing your ERB, you need to understand and you need to think about, the kind of research you have, what the potential negative effects will be on yourselves, on the participants, and on wider society depending on your findings. And that
wow, they say that.
And
they say that in your ERB. The IRB has no such. At least whenever I've submitted papers to the IRB or research proposals to the IRB, I've never been told to think about the wider concern.
So this was something which was told to me, sort of. How shall I say? Like sincerely but informally, as part of a lecture on how to submit your ethics for review boards. Right.
I got it.
Okay.
Informal suggestion.
Right.
Okay.
Informal suggestions, and this thing, but you start seeing it everywhere, and it's mentioned multiple times by multiple people in senior positions in universities that I've interacted with, is this idea of, instead of speak truth to power and speak truth, like, irrespective, like, your duty is to truth, because at the end of the, to take out the kind of the moral or the irrational component. If somebody takes your piece of research and misuses it, that is on them. That first and foremost. Yes. And secondly, if it is being misinterpreted en masse, this is either due to the fact that you are so far ahead of the curve that nobody is comprehending it, or you are expressing your work in a way which is detrimental, as in you're expressing your work in a way which is inaccurate or difficult to understand, when you should be communicating better. It's supposed to be like an incentive, as it were, to like work on your communication skills, especially if you end up in a particular research field, because you end up so specialized, and you're usually doing papers for years on the same thing over and over and over again, but in different ways. And so the idea is that with each iteration you will create something which is more passable, more accurate, more pleasant to read, and that sort of thing. Where the purpose of science. The purpose of science, right?
You're trying to uncover any individual scientist is usually trying to uncover some aspect of truth, a tiny, tiny, tiny microscopic sliver of the pie that is truth, that is reality. That being said, people can take your research and use it for what they want.
And they will.
And they will, absolutely. It happens all the time. My advisor, her first piece of research that was ever published got then republished or talked about in some trash journalist article where they clearly didn't read her article. And they just made their assumptions about it. That will happen no matter what.
And you need to have the fortitude as a researcher that if your work is being misconstrued in that way, to approach that publication first and foremost and threaten them, and demand that either it's removed, that reference is removed, or the article is pulled, or it's accurately represented, or that you can take.
Yeah, but then they'll say you're silencing journalists and you're anti-scientific in your own way, and that's the real.
Well, to be perfectly honest, I would appreciate if somebody had that fight and actually opened up the debate where we can talk about the fact that media rarely, if ever, gets science correct.
They're not capable of doing it in the majority of situations. Journalists are not scientists. They, generally speaking, do not know how to read a scientific paper. Now, I've spent a lot of videos trying to teach regular people how to read a scientific paper because it's not hard. Absolutely everyone can do it. It is not difficult. But reading the abstract is not going to give you an idea of what the paper actually says. Not what's actually in the numbers, in the data. And that's what journalists are doing. They're reading abstracts, often because they don't pay for these studies. They don't have access to the journalists. But you talk about the whole issue of things like Elsevier that make huge amounts of money off of science. And basically prevent people from having access to science.
Oh God, let's not even get to that rabbit hole.
About how journals work. That being said, though, the journalist who publishes these things does not know how to read it and is not taught how to read it. And also, generally speaking, I don't think they care to know how to read it. And that is detrimental and deleterious to public knowge.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%.
My side, which I hate.
If I can just, because there was this, when we were sort of talking about what one may or may not say, what negative news one may suppress or whatever. Not so obvious, you'll no doubt be familiar with this. That is the sort of the approach by the BBC, which effectively doesn't report on things, but does. And what I mean by that is, if you actually watch their 6 o'clock news, it won't be mentioned. If you're driving and you listen on the radio to the news, you won't hear anything. But if you look for it online, there will be some page in which it is covered.
Tucked away, yeah.
So they will be able to say that they did in fact report on it. And, you won't be able to say that they were liars because there is a web page. It's clearly there. But on any of their news broadcasts, there was just complete silence on this particular issue.
Well, it's like
there's salvation in the gaps, essentially.
Yeah, it's like in a broadsheet hiding a story on the 4th page, right? Because they know everybody goes and reads to the first 3.
If you're hiding something on the 4th page, one could still, strictly speaking, just by reading the damn thing, one would find it. But you have to know that the story exists to go looking for it.
Well, it goes back to that.
If you're never told that it actually exists, do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
And it goes back to that cognitive mindfulness thing that I was talking about. In that, sorry, I had to talk too much, but the cognitive mindfulness thing is that we only have so much energy to spend on stuff. If you don't already know something exists, you probably won't go looking for it, because most people don't have the... I mean, like, I sit around and just read current journals every week. I read when they come out, which is usually on a quarterly basis. So when I know there's a new publication out, I go read it. Not many people have the time nor the mental energy to do that. So they're not going to know what they're looking for, generally speaking. And also, they just don't have the energy to do this stuff. No one, unless it is your job, unless you are a scientist, we can't expect people to be scientists. And it's weird when we find also this, something that I find very frustrating, is the worship of science, the scientism that I see going on, particularly with the left, which is that we trust the science, we trust the data, but you haven't read any of it. You don't actually know what you're talking about in terms of the actual science that goes into this, how this works, how... I don't know if anyone on the left could tell me the difference between a regression analysis or a ANOVA, right? I don't think they could explain that. I mean, do you think they could? I think you.
I mean, as someone who's literally just come out of a situation where I've done a quote unquote advanced statistics course, and the number of people who I'd probably say in the region of between 80 and 90% of the people who came out of that class still couldn't tell you what a regression and the difference between a regression and an ANOVA was, and will have completely ignored anything to do with factor analysis and path analysis. But and this is the case throughout the whole thing. Like, I know people. I look at when I was doing my assessments for my university course, and I was getting things wrong, and I was, I'm getting fairly high grades, right? I ended up with a first class degree, and I still didn't feel completely competent at the end of that, right? And for me, it's always been about competence. But you have people there who are like scraping the bottom of the barrel, and they haven't progressed at all since first year. They may as well be a layperson, and they're walking around with the same degree I have. And it's just like, how on earth? You don't know anything. You came to me for help, and you were like, can you help me write my results section, because I've never written one properly myself, and I have no idea what I'm doing, right? So I'm like,
number of people. Yeah, I experienced that a lot.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I was someone who really struggled with statistics when I first started learning it, because I didn't have good teachers in undergrad. I had good teachers in undergrad, but not in high school. I had to really catch up.
It is like, I'm shamelessly shilling here, but this is one of the reasons why I'm writing this statistics course, is to give people a bloody entry-level introduction to this thing, where they can pass it through, and people who are actually interested are going to engage with it, hopefully. It's going to be a great companion for people who are, going through university. It's going to be a great interest piece for anyone who doesn't want to go to university but wants like the primer and then to get into it in their own personal time. And it's going to be a great thing for people who just want to interpret the statistics which are coming at them through the screen, which are being presented by the left, and then to be able to critique.
Yes, and that is what more people need to be able to do, just because there's the scientism bias that I mentioned before, which is that people look at a graph, at numbers, and they go, well, that must be true, without questioning what were the methods. How did they come to this conclusion? What analysis did they use? And it really shouldn't be on the average person to have to do that.
Aydin.
But unfortunately, right now, they do.
Aydin, but line go up, Aydin. Line go up.
Yeah, line go up, therefore means something. That's really unfortunate. I made a series of videos several years ago now that was essentially just that, which was how do I into statistics, very basically, because statistics is the one area of math, and I understand a lot of people have math apprehension and math anxiety, but it's the one area of math that not only do I think is very easy to understand if you have a good teacher to walk you through it, but is also so important to break down bias and spin that you see in the media. Because absolutely the media is so obsessed with statistics, and particularly, I mean all media. I mean social media, I mean YouTube kind of media. I mean, and of course the traditional media that wants to spin statistics to mean whatever they kind of point they're trying to make. And if you can understand how to read statistics, like that's why I put all the graphs up on my screen in my videos, because I'm not lying.
No, you don't. You want to be absolutely you want to be absolutely 100% clear. As Eccles says in chat, lies, damn lies, and statistics. Exactly, and you need to be able to pick out. You need to be able to pick out which lies are in the statistics, because they can tell you anything. But it's like
statistics are lies.
I know, of course.
Depending on the methodology, a statistic can be a lie depending on how it was conducted.
Here's like a really easy example, right? About which will confuse a lot of people. Is like you can conduct an analysis where you compare two variables specifically. Let's call it three. So you've got two variables impacting another one, and so you're comparing the impact of one variable on this thing and another variable on this thing. Yeah, I know. I'm not gonna use all the jargon, right, for people.
Absolutely.
But you can also convert those two. If you have a control group, you can convert those two IV scores, which are what we call those first scores, into a representation of their distance from the mean. We can change them into a representation, and then you can compare that representation to your dependent variable. So it's like a different type of change over time, and it will look a lot more impressive in some cases, right? And this is just one of a few little things which I will obviously explain in much greater detail when I'm going over it in the course. But like it's this like little things like that where you need to know exactly what is being represented on that graph. You know, why the axes where they are, what is being represented on those axes, like why are there different scales in different places. All of that is going to be covered anyway.
I trust that you will do a good job, and I'll definitely look into it. But another thing I want to impart on people listening is that it's not that complicated. It's actually quite easy. I'm math retarded, okay? And I can do advanced level statistics. So if I can do it, I guarantee everybody can do it. And it doesn't take a whole lot of mental energy to do it. You just need to be able to understand what you're looking at. It's just breaking through the barrier of understanding the jargon, of understanding what numbers mean. That's
exactly.
All it is.
So when my course releases, buy it. That's what I'm saying. Okay. I want to get us onto the super chats now. I know Britisher would...
Sorry for deviating so much.
It's fine.
I don't know if I got into a statistics talk, but sorry.
Britisher would love to chime in right now and just say statistics aren't real in any way, shape, or form.
Of course.
Right? He doesn't trust them at all. So that's a another issue. But I don't want to gang up on him today. So starting right back at the beginning of the stream, actually, Sitskoen coming in as our resident timekeeper. Thank you ever so much, Sitskoen, saying 1 minute and 42 seconds late. Better than last week's 2 minutes and 11 seconds. The BBC lying? I can't believe it. It's like a politician being useful. Thank you, Sitskoen. EC90 says, if you read one book about Palestine v Israel, read Son of Hamas by Masad Hassan Youssef. It's an amazing true story about the son of one of the Hamas founders. Oh, that sounds really interesting, actually. I will look at that. EC90,
yeah, definitely.
EC90 also says Bashir also. So this is back referencing the the scandal, royal scandal, and that sort of thing. Bashir also did the infamous MJ interview, Michael Jackson, fuckwit.
Oh.
Yeah, I do you know what he's referencing with the infamous MJ interview, Britisher?
I think I recall him interviewing Michael Jackson, but I don't know what was infamous about it.
Michael Bashir, Michael Jackson's UK publicist.
Martin Bashir.
Martin
Jackson.
Yeah, Martin Bashir. Martin Jackson and Michael Bashir. Okay. He admitted. Oh, right. ITV commissioned ITV.
The one where he talked
he,
about some of the weird stuff that happened.
He admitted that he'd shared his bed with children.
Yeah, I thought.
Yeah. So that's dodgy.
Yes, but this is what I mean with it can kind of make you if you can get a sort of a big royal interview, because a lot of people will kind of think, oh, this doesn't really matter because it's just some kind of royal this and whatever. But it sure as hell mattered to him. He then went on to interview Michael Jackson.
Yeah, exactly, right.
The Michael Jackson interview also, and I won't super stand up to defend Michael Jackson, but I do think that interview was framed very poorly in that, I'm not going to super stand up and defend Michael Jackson, like I said, but I don't think, and there were never any real credible allegations that he actually hurt any children. He was a very deeply disturbed person, I think, who had a very messed up childhood himself, and I think what he was trying to do, the whole Neverland Ranch thing, was and this is my opinion, I could be totally wrong about this, I think he wanted to save children from the way that Hollywood cannibalizes them. And choose them up and spit them out through a process of child molestation and abuse.
Well, there's that, but there's also, I think because he lost his entire childhood to abuse, I think he never got over that and wanted to be a child and live it himself. And of course, he could never reclaim it. It's a very tragic position.
I do think it's very tragic. I don't like the framing of Michael Jackson. I mean, I don't know him, obviously. I didn't know MJ, but so I don't know if he actually was a child abuser or not. But as far as I know, nothing was ever actually definitively proven against him in courts of law, and even some of the people who came out and talked negatively about him then recanted their stories in certain ways. So I'm a little bit suspect. My opinion, like I said, is that I think he was abused by Hollywood, and I think he had sympathy and empathy for children who were similarly being abused by Hollywood.
Well, we won't know now. He's dead, so
right. Pointless to speculate.
There we go. That Indian dude says, I found it rather fascinating that Anthony Fauci has now said that the lab leak theory for COVID cannot be rejected outright. Yeah. That's what we did to get that topic. Interesting again, just another case of Fauci. He will see absolutely zero comeback for that. Like, there will be no consequences for him changing his position.
How many times does he flip-flop, though? I mean, he was the person who originally said that we don't need to wear masks. And then he became worshipped by the people who... And, I have my very strong opinions about people who were... who are mask worshippers, I would say, in that it provides them with a sense of social and psychological security. And the mask also, by the way, anonymizes you, and it makes you more capable of de-individuating other people and dehumanizing them. So,
yeah,
it's funny also that the mask worshippers also worship Fauci, despite the fact that he was originally against masks. But Fauci appears to have no issues changing his opinion, and he would say with the science, but
well, he also
the science. Masks never work.
He would say with the science, but it's always maintained as if this was always the position, and that's also frustrating. Right. There's no recognition that this is a changing playing field. I mean,
yes,
that's a very particular strategy as well. Like, why would you ever admit this? But it's also frustrating that nobody ever holds him to account on it, right? Nobody is questioning, like, why have you changed your position on blah 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 blah, right? Nobody is saying that. Whereas I would say if the Trump administration was still there, they'd be ripping into that, for instance.
Oh, they would be disgusted by it. I would say, as a quick aside, have you seen some of the really heinous, like, TikTok musical videos where they sing about how much they love Fauci.
Oh,
Dr. Fauci, give us vaccines. Oh, it's so cringe. It's truly like terminal cancer.
It's not just Fauci, isn't it? It's I've seen the same thing with Biden, and
Yes.
there seems to be some sort of strange Democrat thing whereby they kind of try and do something a bit like a musical.
yeah, very gay.
Yeah.
Very gay.
But it just
Right, it is very gay. It's maybe that I think they've even said that like, oh, the theater majors have been out of work for too long, and maybe that's part of it. But I also find it to be this strange performance of social identity and political social identity in particular that is bizarre, particularly as it refers to Fauci, and engulfing him into some political position that I didn't think he otherwise would have, other than the fact that he's a complete hypocrite and changes his opinion. Again, it's not necessarily the same type of hypocrisy you would say if someone flipped their position on something. It is, as you said, the fact that he didn't acknowledge that he was previously incorrect about stuff. That's where I get irritated, is the lack of acceptance that the previous announcements were incorrect. That's frustrating. Sorry.
British Knight sent in £10. Thank you, British Knight. Very generous. Like Aydin
hey.
says, like Aydin, I'm a libertarian, an ANCAP even. The question for me,
Yeah.
the question for me isn't if libertarianism is good. The question is the world ready for it? If it isn't, protectionism will inevitably remain.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I don't know if
I don't think,
Well-
like, the trouble is I don't think the world will ever be ready for it.
No, I think certain communities could be ready for libertarianism, but we live in a global community, and therefore it's always going to be difficult. The problem is libertarianism actually has the same problem as communism. Either the whole world has to adopt it, or else it fails. And like most idealistic ideologies, that is a problem with libertarianism. I do think libertarianism can work, but global libertarianism would kind of have to be the standard, I think, and that's something I don't like admitting.
Oh,
but
it's
probably
getting a bit too utopian there. Yeah.
No, I'm saying it's not utopian. That's
No,
the problem.
it-
Utopias don't exist.
Well, no, that just means you're self-aware. That's different to that.
I
Okay.
guess so
Fury Kitten says, was trying to remember his name. Would Chaim Rumkowski count as a greasy pole, Britisher?
I have no idea what that means.
Chaim
Do you?
Rumkowski. Chaim Rumkowski. Chaim Rumkowski was the head of the Jewish Council of Elders in the ghetto during the Nazi German occupation of Poland. What is this a reference to?
I have no idea.
Fury, I know you're still in the chat. Just clarify for us what this means, but because we appear to be a little out of context there. Hollow 1916 says this whole media manipulation doesn't help when text search engines deliberately curate search results for correct opinions. Yeah, that's a whole other issue.
Yeah.
Is the alliance there?
And by the way, the thing that I find a lot of people on the left say is they say that's not real. Well, we have published scientific data from these companies.
They admit
to say
it's
that
real. They admit it's
They-
real.
no,
They're not hiding
know.
anything. Like,
Well, it's just fascinating to me to not only watch like companies like YouTube and Google. I mean, it's all Google in that case, but to say yes, we absolutely do manipulate data. We absolutely do manipulate what people see. But then we have scientific studies and analyses that show that, yeah, it works. It affects what people see. And yet, to this day, there are people predominantly on the left who say, no, that's not real. That's all a conspiracy theory. How is it a conspiracy theory when not just only do the companies admit that they do it, but when scientific data analysis proves that they do and it has a demonstrable effect? I'm real tired of that. That one really irritates me. That's a pet peeve.
what you're describing is social ANCOVA, and it should never have been discovered. That was... Oh, that's just a joke for you scientists in the chat. Mr. Gently Benevolent says, pretty certain MJ actually admitted to sharing his bedroom with children. The fact that his bedroom had 2 levels and was the size of a 2-bedroom house
Yeah.
Yeah, like, I mean, there's so much controversy.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll ever know for real.
I don't know. If it is ever found out for real that he molested children, then, absolute disgust,
Yeah.
shame.
If a video comes out or something.
But yeah. I'm just not convinced with the current level of evidence. If he did do it, then it's wrong. But, I mean, we've moved so much farther past the MJ sort of allegations. We're not like... it's become that, like, because nothing else is apparently condemnable, such as being a pedophile, as it should be the most condemnable thing, I think, besides being a murderer. Now, both sides seem to throw that kind of label out at people they don't like. And I don't like it without evidence.
No, of course. I mean, just think burden of proof. That's the big thing.
Yeah.
Mr. Gently Benevolent says, support for Uncle Awuish's bomb the Chi-Com policy. Britisher.
I won't even dignify that with an answer.
No. Okay, like, being serious. You want to drop Brussels sprouts on Brussels. What will you drop on Beijing?
I don't know. That's,
egg fried rice? Dim sum?
How about Peking duck?
Or General Tso's chicken?
Just to prove to them that it's actually still called Peking.
Wasn't there? Oh, that's good. That would be extra good. And also, I think there was like a MythBusters episode where they like tested how deleterious, how harmful it would be, like dropping a bird. Oh, they were throwing it onto a plane. So there you go.
Right.
It can like mess up a plane if you throw a frozen bird onto it. So if you drop thousands of frozen Peking ducks onto
oh yeah. Fun story.
Is this that when they throw things into turbines?
What?
In order to test the actual engines.
It was to see if birds could get into turbines and cause planes to crash.
And of course, there's the funny story of, I think it was Rolls-Royce and an American company. I can't remember which American company it was. And they had basically said, here's this chicken cannon, which fires, frozen chickens at planes.
Yeah.
And of course, the Americans kept saying, well, we don't know what's going wrong. The chickens just keep going straight through the planes. And they said, it turned out they went back, they examined the cannon, like it was firing appropriately and everything was going fine. It just turned out they hadn't thawed the chickens. So they're supposed to be, just chickens from the shop, defrosted. They're supposed to be chickens from the shop, raw chickens. But they hadn't. They had just taken them out the freezer and loaded them in to effectively firing enormous ice.
They might as well have been firing bowling balls at the.
Rather than anything approximating flesh. I wish I could remember the exact details of that story, but it's escaping me right now, unfortunately.
Well, MythBusters did the same thing, so whatever.
Well, damn. If MythBusters did it, then God, horrific. Must
be true.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of the show. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed it this week. I hope that you in chat have as well. I would like to give a warm thank you to both of my co-hosts for this evening. Thank you very much, Britisher, for joining us as always.
It's a pleasure as ever.
And thank you for Aydin for coming on such short notice.
Oh yeah, anytime, man. Well, anytime I'm not doing something else, I guess.
Yes,
I'm just editing or researching, so it's things I can take a break from. Thanks for inviting me on.
I leave chat with the sage advice which has just been given us, gentlemen, thaw your chickens. And with that, good night, everybody. Take care. Bye bye.
Okay.